Roman Abramovskyy, 47 years old, graduated from the National Academy of Internal Affairs, a businessman, worked as an MP's advising assistant, was assigned as Deputy Minister of Regional Development in 2015. From 2019 to 2020, Abramovskyy served as Deputy Minister of Energy and Environmental Protection of Ukraine, married with 2 sons.
A week ago, the mass media went off about the news regarding your retirement. How would you comment, and was that something unexpected for you?
To be honest, I believe that everyone already knows that I filed for resignation and submitted it to the President of Ukraine personally. Before my application, I had a conversation with the Prime Minister where he made several remarks on the work of the Ministry of Transport regarding the pace of the reforms. We weren't able to come to a conclusion to level our relationship in the discussion, not a personal one, of course, but the relationship between the Minister and the Prime Minister. This is why I filed for resignation and passed it to the President of Ukraine, which in turn was passed to the Verkhovna Rada over Ukraine. Then there was a conversation with the President and the Prime Minister, and that was it. Nothing really happened later. I proceeded working as a minister.
Which reform did the Prime Minister find unfavorable?
Well, there were several issues that made it unfavorable, including the issue of subsoil use, the development of a new subsoil code. But to this date, the new subsoil code has already been sent for approval to the central executive bodies. Plus, public discourse is in process. We are completely ready, and I believe that in a month, maybe in 1.5 months, we will be issued the approval by the Cabinet of Ministers and get registered in the Verkhovna Rada. And further on, the process will be in the hands of the Parliament.
Regarding other policies, since your ministry has a great scope of policies, which other policies do you manage?
There are a lot of policies. This is the forest industry policy, the policy of Nature Reserve Fund, the preservation and development of biodiversity in Ukraine, and of course the divestment policy, and everything related to radioactive waste, disposal, and the function of the zone barrier, including nuclear safety as well. In general, the policy regarding air quality, including water policy, maritime policy. In total, 14 policies, 14 main areas without subdirections.
Basically, it's all under the same roof.
Indeed, but nevertheless, we have an amazing team, and I have always been on a firm position that should you fail to satisfy the needs of your management, and they tell you directly that there are drawbacks in the reforms, then the management is surely given the opportunity to choose to either let you go or keep you on the position you occupy. And that was the reason I filed for resignation.
There must be a huge amount of work, right? How do you manage all that?
Well, that's part of the job. I heard once in a popular movie, when you succeed in managing with 2 people, the amount of subordinates doesn't matter later on. The truth is the team, in the first place, is the staff, the people you worked with. You need to care about your staff. You need to create a proper staff. Its potential must operate at full capacity. I know that I managed to fulfill this task in the best way possible. I have great specialists in their fields in this ministry. I'm very proud of the work they have done so far. I strongly believe that we have a very powerful team of specialists.
Every powerful agency has its own subordinated body, which have their own management. How is the KPI, as it's called nowadays, estimated?
Well, the truth is, there are approved procedures for civil servants. This evaluation and the procedures are basically, bureaucratic, so to say. Plus, I have my own evaluation system, and I can say that after going through such a stressful time with the application and a possible resignation, I will also review the level of professionalism and efficiency of managers. I won't announce it yet in order to avoid causing wrong speculations, so to say, not for the society or managers directly. They are aware of all my complaints. They will be given some time to introduce changes. Otherwise, there will be changes in the staff.
How do you personally estimate KPI?
Well, first of all, we work for the people, and the effectiveness of different inspections, let's say, depends on the satisfaction of the communities. Whether it's the people who come with direct complaints about violations of environmental legislation, plus the inspections must have a proactive position. You must understand that we do not focus on fines and losses on preventive measures. Corruption, of course, is out of the question. Any corruption causing motives that can lead to corruption. And I have always emphasized on this. But unfortunately, we do not have the necessary mechanisms to monitor this. The constant monitoring of the decency of top management, I mean. But we still get information from all the stakeholders, and we see the general picture of the corruption level of a particular executive body.
If we put corruption aside, is there a personnel crisis in the government in general? What can you say regarding your ministry?
Well, as I've already mentioned earlier, we have a pretty good team of professionals in our staff. Something I cannot say regarding the executive bodies, where the payroll budget is lesser and the staff isn't as efficient as it's supposed to be, mildly speaking. But now we wish to carry out a restructuring of all the agencies, including environmental inspections, the State Forest Agency, and the Fishery Agency. We wish to increase the motivation of both tangibles and intangibles and use the payroll budget to the max on specialists that are actually worth it.
Another policy you are in charge of is the subsoil use policy, which currently is under reform. Are you satisfied with this reform, and maybe there is a potential that we haven't revealed yet?
You are absolutely right. We are trying to make the field of subsoil use attractive, understandable for the investors. That's why this new subsoil code was developed in the first place. But two more bills that have been registered in the Verkhovna Rada that will provide precise changes in the current code, hopefully will be set under consideration in the session hall. The law is being formed for the development of the mineral resource base, the fund of the state mineral resource base, which we intend to enrich at the expense of deductions from the paid rent and the issuing of permits. There is a lot to be worked on. Apart from that, we've introduced changes in the current regulations. There has been a lot of criticism on this matter, but I think we always try to be systematic. You once said, I remember that, if the government takes the next step, I mean after the oil and gas initiative, it will all be clear. We really took the next step on the Lvivska territory, actually, after which we follow the path that has been programmed from the beginning. The reform is indeed ongoing. Deregulation is our goal, so that the access to subsoil use takes as little time as possible, so that as few agencies as possible are involved in the procedure of issuing such permits. Access to procurements. We have already made the appropriate decisions, and minerals of national importance are put up for procurement. Even if the initiation comes from the business entity, this was also welcomed by the subsoil use as well. Another point we are working on is interconnected subsoil use, meaning if the investor already has a functioning facility where the added value increases, the state receives more, and in turn, with a certain radius, the investor will be able to obtain permits without participating in any of the procurements. This will encourage investors to invest in recycling, but in a, let's say, more in-depth processing of minerals, which is very important. Ultimately, this is additional income, and it is another added value or taxes, jobs, and so on.
In your opinion, what challenges or drawbacks can someone face in investing in this field?
Well, if we take a look in the past, it was completely a corrupt industry where everything was done under the tablecloth, and no one knew what was happening actually. The investor, in fact, was entering as if in the legal field, and he was immediately squeezed out into the non-legal field. In some cases, it wasn't clear for him. If it also is a foreign investor who doesn't understand the language, then we're talking about bribes and many, many other things. I think that the ambiguity is the first thing that worries the investor. Certain transparent rules of the game, which are to comply with the laws and legal acts, absolutely suit the investors. We've simplified many things when the new subsoil code was developed on the basis of European directives and European legislation. I must say that we simplified many aspects because everything is regulated in Europe. The rules are clear to everyone and are followed by all investors who wish to enter the market.
If I understand correctly, Europeans write the code for us, where in fact this field is regulated.
Well, I'll put it this way. We think we should let the investors breathe in order to launch the market. Indeed, in order to ensure effective access to minerals, we have to apply a little less regulation in the early stages. But this does not apply to the environmental component. We will not step back on this one, and everything that was declared by me personally, my colleagues, will be transferred to a new subsoil code. The procedure for environmental impact assessment, that is, and this is actually a dialogue between the investor and the community. In order to avoid any misunderstandings in the community regarding the activities, it is best to take everything into account at the stage of economic conditions and continue with a clear plan.
We know that recently methodological recommendations have been created for oil and gas and other minerals as if they do not exist in Ukraine. Why do you think this happened, and should we address this as a challenge?
I'm afraid it is so, but it is not the biggest problem for PRS, whether it's a classifier for solid minerals. Well, no, that's not the issue. We will introduce these procedures, which will have an organic flow later on. The main thing is to remove unnecessary regulations, make access to production faster, and I repeat, ensuring all environmental safety measures, and in fact, I think this will be enough for the investor to decide and enter the Ukrainian market.
At the moment, everything takes place in an electronic procurement that go according to our standards, which they don't understand. Don't you think they would find it difficult to get along?
Yes, you have a point. This can be seen as a challenge, but certainly not as a problem, because all investors who come here are localized and have their own offices, which in principle can translate them from one language to a common language. I should say that this is not an issue of high priority, but we do keep it in mind.
You mean you are on it? You will lead Ukraine
Absolutely.
towards international standards. From the business point of view, another issue is the issue of land. You know that first we acquire a special permit as a business, speaking of our investors, either international or domestic, and then we are faced with the fact that we actually bought a piece of paper. Let's come clean. And then we arrive at the acquired land and witness that the land belongs to someone else. What do you do in this case?
Frankly speaking, all countries have faced the same issue. If you were to talk about ownership or whether the right on land exploitation on which the investor is trying to manipulate is of long term, then it is a matter of commercial negotiations between the investor and the land user or landowner. There is a mechanism introduced in the law on amber mining. It's been passed along the offices. We do what we can. Well, if the investor really put the land he owned up on procurement, all actions and deals are closed with this owner in person.
Well-known companies such as the Canadian Black Iron Company, Titanium companies, and so on, they always have the first inquiry after obtaining a special permit, and in fact, they continue to turn to frozen. We will cover this subject as well. Maybe you will need to leave electronic procurements for last.
You can do that too. That's the easiest way. You already are the landowner or the user, but what if you lose the procurement? Then what?
Do you have the necessary information?
Exactly. Or even maybe the price raises. You also have a competition that you need to take into consideration. We should not forget about blackmailing either. As you can understand, there are pros and cons. We need to find the right balance, such a harmonious state where the investor can secure their interests, the land user feels safe. What I mean is they should always be on terms of agreement, just like in any business. The main thing is that the state doesn't interfere and complicate these processes.
You mean the ministry won't have any influence on these processes? All communication takes place between the investor and the landowner.
Absolutely. There is nothing unusual about this. Plus, if we consider the processes that take place in our territorial communities, which in the future will become land plots, the land within the community will be fully disposed of, roughly speaking, something that will make it easier to negotiate or more difficult to negotiate with landowners or land users in the communities. This is what we call business and business risks.
They talk about these so-called frozen licenses in Ukraine very often, since previous years and the previous governments. What is your position on this? How can you deal with this? Can we fight it? Should we fight, or will it somehow disappear itself in the future?
Well, we formulated and placed our idea in the new subsoil code. This issue is also being under consideration in the bills that already are registered in the council. We move away from a retrospective view in order to avoid making wrong decisions. But for the sake of the site, if no works take place on the site during some time, the investor pays for the subsoil which he doesn't use. Well, the so-called user drop principle. So we fully support the position that subsoil should be used, extracted, benefit the government and the investor, including the Ukrainian people, as the owner of the subsoil, and not be just a useless piece of paper, as you mentioned earlier.
Regarding the next step of action, digitalization, e-procurement.
The maps?
Exactly. Do you think it needs to be improved? Have you used it?
Yes, I have. Yes, there are some issues, some bugs to be worked on. I am aware of them, but you know how it is, right? It's always easier to improve an existing project than to endlessly refine the system, even if it's a researching system.
Regarding the completion of existing systems, the electronic cabinet of subsoil user was announced back in 2019, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
What progress has been made?
We came across a lot of drawbacks in the long run, but we eventually found the way to get around it. The technical structure of it was completely incomprehensible, not to mention that it was completely absent. We are talking about the times of the previous government, the previous stuff, and frankly speaking, we found it the hard way on getting back on track regarding our work. We came across with a lot of problems. We understood these problems. Fundamentally, little has been done, and we have now delegated a task to the State Agency of Minerals and Subsoil of Ukraine to develop such a system at their own expense or of donors, and till the 1st of September of 2021, as you know, all administrative services must be provided electronically. Time is of the essence, but we see that the agency is able to cope with the assignment.
I have to ask you about the ecology, a question I cannot skip. By 2050, Europe is preparing to move on this so-called Green Deal. Are you planning, well, along with the European colleagues, through the ministry, let's say, create a company and transition on this Green Deal?
Well, in general, the ministry is the driver of these processes. Yes, and together with the Office of Deputy Prime Minister Olga Stefanishina, we are the drivers on the highest political level. Apart from that, we already have the political support for this process. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal was scheduled to meet in December with Franz Timmermans, the vice president in charge of climate policy. But due to COVID, the meeting was transferred to February, if I'm not mistaken. But all the processes of preparation, they are ongoing. And there are many aspects, and the European institution has created such alliances, the battery alliances and many others, that will work horizontally on the European Green Course. Ukraine has for the first time supported such an initiative.
This means less hydrocarbons extraction due to climate change, right?
Yes, absolutely. You see, the main goal of the European Green Course is to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. And this is combined with the fact that fossil fuels are burned less and less.
Remaining of the subject, it's important to mention, for example, the environmental impact assessment. Now this is more of the recommended regulation.
You mean the procedures?
Yes. Do you believe that these regulations will become standardized?
Frankly speaking, this is the third time I am answering this question for today. And yes, I always give the same reply. We've created the necessary recommendations that will assist any developer, no matter of their status.
Is this your third time answering this question on camera?
No, not on camera. During a public meeting. In fact, we have developed recommendations that will help businesses, environmental impact assessment developers with their reports, to be as specific as possible and not miss any research of a particular area of the economy. There is also a list regarding subsoil use. It's not an exclusive list, though. It's a specific list of what needs to be researched. It's more like a guide for the developer of the environmental impact assessment report. We wouldn't like to make it mandatory because, well, certain conditions in which the activities will be carried out may differ critically. We may not be able to understand this. Thus, there will be a reference to the fact that all the recommendations have been implemented. But there are additional environmental conditions set by the ministry or by the public proposition of an economic entity. This wasn't in our plans, to be honest, but we created these recommendations in order to avoid misunderstandings in the report. Of course, when we come to a conclusion on the environmental impact assessment, officials as well rely on what is written in the recommendations for the development of the report. This is business assistance, nothing more, nothing less. This is not a regulation, and we would not want to make it a regulation.
So it's more of a recommendation after all.
Absolutely, but an in-depth recommendation, in order not to miss anything, so that the research is fulfilled correctly. For example, the developer missed hydrogeological issue of a quarry. In this case, we are forced to send it for an additional environmental impact evaluation. And such things, happen often. This is a waste of time, a waste of resources. In addition, it is much better if he reads the guide, hydrogeology. Was the research fulfilled? Yes. If not, he does the necessary research and hands over the report. We save time. And of course, the quality of the report is better, and we get less complaints from the public.
You see, the question is, it's like a dilemma for me, honestly, because what I've heard from different businesses is that they would like this document to become normative, because it's easier for them to acknowledge that it's normative, and if, for example, they did not perform the impact assessment correctly, etc., who can sue them? Is it the ministry or any other agency? Only to the court of law, right? And if this document is normative, in their opinion, it will be easier to appeal in the court. This is an inquiry from the businesses.
Frankly speaking, this is the first time I hear this. It's not difficult for us to do it. In fact, we will hold more consultations. I guess we may need to make some exceptions for subsoil users and implement these recommendations. We will definitely work on this matter. But the general philosophy is to help businesses turn it into a guideline for compiling an environmental impact assessment report, but not as a non-regulatory one. I think there will be a lot of complaints when we turn it into regulatory. It is still necessary to hold a consultation session. To tell you the truth, I am not ready to finalize an opinion, not even today.
Before proceeding to our quickfire questions, I'd like to ask you about your super tasks. After all, Groisman's cabinet is associated with decentralization, Omelan airports, Avakov is the police. But what can the name Abramovskyy be associated with? Which reform?
It's hard to say. I want to put my efforts to the maximum in the forest section because it's our wealth, the Ukrainian forests. I want to do a lot in the field of subsoil use. I want to do it, and I will probably make this a separate reform, the reform of environmental funds. In fact, I'm planning to bring the financial component of environmental policy into a separate fund that will be accumulated in one fund. I mean, all the money of environmental taxes, technical assistance, donor money, and then divided into environmental policies to even support environmental activities of large, medium, and small businesses. Reduce credit rates on a competitive basis, if possible. Maybe even grants, distribution, receive prizes on competitions, and so on. This is the European model. You see, the money paid for environmental pollution are used again and again for the sake of a healthy life for the people.
Ecology and healthy way of life.
Hopefully, but I'd like to emphasize by saying that finances dealing with the ecology are my goal.
Let's start our quickfire questions, shall we? First question: how do you keep in shape?
I do sports.
How many books have you read this year?
2 or 3? Three.
Which ones?
Well, let's see, 100 Years of Solitude. Very happy I read it. I wanted to read it very, very much, but just couldn't find the time. I read The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco in winter. I accidentally found it and started reading it. Well, at the moment, I'm finishing the Churchill Factor.
Do you have any bad habits?
No, I don't.
Are you an ideal minister?
With no bad habits.
Who do you call on the phone the most?
Deputies the most, I guess.
What do you do to relax?
I spend time with the family. We talk. I think this is the best way to relax.
What's your favorite place in Ukraine?
The Carpathian Mountains.
Why?
I love it there. I draw my energy from there. My goal in the long run is to make Ukraine breathe freely through the Carpathian Mountains.
What's the most extreme thing you have ever done in your life?
I'm far from being extreme.
Which country do you dream to visit?
Australia.
Why Australia?
Well, it seems to me that Australia is another world completely, and in order to evaluate the world you are living in, you must explore a new one. Well, for some reason, I always wanted to go there, but there were many opportunities actually, but I didn't use them. I hope I will use all the opportunities I have in the future.
In one word, what does it mean being a minister?
It's a tough position. Trust me, I have worked in businesses and NGOs. Being a minister is a tough job.
Is the Christmas tree in your house real or non-natural?
No, natural. It's been like this for many years. 12, I think. It's great, It never changes color or anything. We can keep it as long as we like and still remains beautiful.
What's your favorite movie?
That's going to be a sedacious answer. 17 Moments of Spring.
Who's your favorite character?
I really like the pastor. That would be my favorite character.
Do you sort the garbage at home?
Yes, we have been sorting the garbage for 2 years. My wife was the initiator, actually. I do believe that this is a responsibility of everyone. This makes it much easier to dispose, The sorted garbage ends up in recycling and not on illegal dumps or similar places.
What time do you start your day?
I wake up at 6 in the morning. The working day starts at about 9 a.m. I have meetings, different discussions with people. I work from home as well, so it may even start at 9 or maybe a bit later.
What's the most expensive gift you have given?
Lately or in general?
In general.
I bought my wife a car once.
What car?
A Range Rover.
Great. How are you planning on celebrating New Year's Eve?
With the family, with my wife, with the children.
Describe the country we are building.
Well, I hope that we're building a dreamland. I will do everything I can to make our dreams come true.
I'd like to thank you on this last optimistic note, and I hope your dreams come true.
Thank you.
Thank you.